Dr. Osamu Tezuka, the god of manga, wrote over 150,000 pages over the course of his illustrious 40-year career, but from his extensive bibliography, the one manga he considered to be his life's work, his magnum opus, was not the ever-so-popular Astro Boy, or Blackjack, or Dororo, but rather Phoenix, a deeply philosophical and existential series about what it means to live. Phoenix follows 12 different standalone yet interconnected tales revolving around this mythical bird whose blood would grant any living being immortality. The stories within this series span as far back as prehistoric times to far ahead in the future, and it's structured in a way that makes it alternate between a historic tale and a futuristic one, while slowly moving closer and closer towards the present, where all these stories were supposed to converge with one final tale that would tie everything together. However, Osamu Tezuka unfortunately passed away in 1989, leaving the series forever incomplete. Yet despite that, Phoenix still firmly remains regarded as one of the greatest manga ever made, and it heavily inspired so many Japanese writers and artists, including many of my personal favorites like Naoki Urasawa, Ryukishi Zeronana, and even Gen Urobuchi. And having finally read it for myself, I can firmly say that Phoenix is one of the most impressive works of art I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing. If I could find some term to describe the manga, it would be otherworldly. It's simultaneously mystical and spiritual, while also being very real and existential, with the same messages of humanism and pacifism that are seen all throughout the rest of Tezuka's bibliography. And for as many of my favorite series as Phoenix has inspired, Phoenix itself is truly one of a kind, like nothing I've ever read before. Osamu Tezuka's daughter, Rumiko Tezuka, had summed it up quite perfectly at the Phoenix exhibition that happened earlier in 2025. Phoenix is Osamu Tezuka himself. It was his most personal creation, untouched by external influences, and remains a testament to his boundless creativity. When you read the manga for yourself, you can truly see just how personal it was. I cannot even fathom how one human being could even conceive of such a series. This manga is truly phenomenal. In this review, I will first have a spoiler-free section, and then a full series spoiler section. In the spoiler-free part of this review, I will first delve into what I liked about the manga, and then go over the very few things that I didn't quite like. Afterwards, in the full series spoiler section, I will briefly delve into my thoughts on each part of the manga, story by story. So let's get started with the spoiler-free section and discuss what I liked, which was a heck of a lot for that matter. I've often said on my channel that the most important part of any story for me is what someone ultimately takes away from it, or otherwise, its themes. And first and foremost, Phoenix's single biggest strength is exactly that. It's very much a theme-first series, almost like it was engineered for someone with my tastes. Oftentimes, you'll see stories focus extensively on characterization for the sake of characterization, because that's what the masses like. But Phoenix is not at all that kind of series. The characterization that's present is purposeful and doesn't detract in any way from the series' messaging. It's very to the point, wasting little time in any of its volumes. Each and every single one of Phoenix's stories is incredibly thematically rich, filled to the brim with fascinating social commentary and an in-depth exploration of a number of different topics. The series is about existentialism, what it means to be human, the dichotomy of love and hate, human avarice, the problems that arise with the politicization of religion, the sanctity of all living beings, amidst a number of ideas. But more than anything, and as I mentioned at the start of the video, Phoenix is about what it means to live, an idea that is especially interesting in the context of it being a series following the sheer vanity of humans' pursuit for immortality. It's a constant contrast explored at every point of the series. In addition to the themes though, I also adored the series' format and structure. In terms of the episodic format, I think that all the stories present within Phoenix were of appropriate length, not too short and not too long. And with that, while I certainly had some stories I liked more than others, the series was overall fairly consistent in quality from story to story. Oftentimes, even with the best of episodic series, you can find an inconsistency in the quality of each individual episode, but Phoenix is thankfully not one of those sorts of series. I liked each and every single chapter of the story. On note of the structure, I don't think I've ever come across another work designed in such a fashion. It's both very unique and also very fitting for the type of series that Phoenix is. As I mentioned earlier on in the video, Phoenix alternates between a historic and futuristic story, while working its way towards the present, with each story within the series being simultaneously both self-contained and yet also interconnected with the other stories. And what the series ends up highlighting with this structure is that no matter what time period, be it as far back as prehistoric times or over 1,000 years into the future, there's aspects about humanity, both good and bad, that never seem to change. There's actually a few times where you see both the past and the future within the same exact story, which even further hammers home this point as well. Lastly, I also adored the artwork. Tezuka's backgrounds are generally pretty solid, but my goodness, his background art in Phoenix is some of the best I've ever seen. I honestly did not expect the artwork to be this mesmerizing. It's surreal, breathtaking, otherworldly even. And even background art quality aside, I was very impressed by the creativity of the paneling and the way the manga's paneling took such strong advantage of repeatedly contrasting the pitch black with the bright white. Despite virtually all manga being black and white in the first place, I find it's a little rare for mangaka to so consistently emphasize this level of contrast in practically every chapter of the story. In general though, it's a little amusing to reflect upon Phoenix's art being one of my favorite parts of the manga, since there's a good number of people out there who entirely dismiss Tezuka's work simply because of his art. I suppose this is more often just a matter of his seemingly childlike character designs, but really in most of his works, the very childlike appearance of his characters heavily contrasts the dark and gruesome content of the actual surrounding storyline. In Phoenix, his characters still very much look like Tezuka's usual kiddish style, but it still feels very mature at every step of the way. Now, in terms of what I didn't like, first is something that's not even Tezuka's fault, but I don't like the fact that it's incomplete. This may be an episodic series, but it was one that was designed in a way wherein the ending was supposed to interconnect and recontextualize everything that came beforehand, and Tezuka even requested that people save their critiques of Phoenix for after he finished it up. So given the design of the story, it's such a shame that Tezuka passed away before he got to the finish line. The series wasn't even that far away from reaching the present. It probably would have only needed a few more stories, and it would have reached Tezuka's intended finish line. But nonetheless, it being incomplete does color the way that I perceive the story. It is damn near a masterpiece, but it is unfinished, and the world will never truly know what Tezuka's full vision of the story was. And that saddens me. Besides its incompleteness, another thing that I didn't quite like about the series is the actions and attitudes of certain characters in the series that I think were a little unbelievable. As I mentioned earlier, characters are not the focus of Phoenix, and I'm entirely fine with that. I firmly regard characters as an element of a story and not the point of a story. What matters first and foremost is a story's themes, and I don't think you should ever characterize solely for the sake of characterization. This is seemingly the very philosophy that Tezuka subscribes to with Phoenix, keeping the story focused on the message. But even with that in mind, I do find that some of the ridiculousness with the characters is a little much. Oftentimes, humanity being ridiculous is the entire point, so it makes sense for the characters to be ridiculous as well. But for a series that is fundamentally about life and human nature, I just find it so hard to believe that any human being in existence would act the way that some of the characters in a few of the stories do, particularly in the cases of incest. And sometimes I feel like that weakens the overall thematic cohesion of the series. In the grand scheme of things, that is a fairly minor and insignificant complaint, but it is nonetheless something that I figure was worth mentioning since it did impede my overall experience with Phoenix. One last thing about the manga that I wanted to comment on, which isn't exactly a complaint, but more so something that I think might rub people the wrong way, is the way it handles commentary surrounding religion, specifically in the Karma and Sun arcs. I don't think too many people would take much issue with how Phoenix explores the issues that arise with the politicization of religion. In fact, I often hear people say that this is one of their favorite parts of the manga. And I agree, it's one of the most interesting parts of the manga because it's a topic that most fictional writers shy away from. But nonetheless, in Tezuka's words in the afterword of the Sun chapter, he describes his message of the story being that all religion is inherently man-made and a product of contemporary cultures. As the old and new continue to collide, so too will religion. I think that's an interesting thesis, and the way the manga explores it is well done. But at the same time, I think his views towards religion still might be a bit eyebrow-raising. Though with that, I must move on to the full series spoiler section of my review, where I briefly go over my thoughts on each story individually. First up is Dawn, a strong first story to Phoenix, and one that makes much of the thematic intent behind the series immediately obvious. Dawn tackles topics like betrayal, forgiveness, the fear of the unknown, the pointlessness of warfare, the vanity of the desire for wealth and immortality, as well as generally, what it means to live. I honestly have very few complaints for Dawn. It tackles and sets up so many interesting ideas, but at the same time, in the grand scheme of things, I didn't think Dawn gripped me the way a lot of the others did. But next up immediately after Dawn was Future, which I felt very differently about. It actually ended up being one of my favorite stories from the manga for that matter. Future covers a lot of the same topics as Dawn, like the pointlessness of warfare and what life itself really means. And the similarities in the way it depicts these topics, particularly the pointlessness of warfare, is immediately quite thought-provoking in that their commentary ends up being largely the same regardless of when in history the stories occur. Such would point towards Tezuka's ideas for universal truths. That being said, however, Future takes those concepts from Dawn and significantly expands upon them, while also exploring a number of new ideas for itself. Whereas Dawn was more concerned about what it meant to live, Future centered itself more around how exactly you define something as a living being. And part of the way it explores this is through artificial existences, like the Muppies, the robots like Robita, and even Saruta's artificial life forms who aren't capable of surviving outside a test tube. Future was overall a big step up from Dawn, and in the grand scheme of things, easily one of my favorite parts of Phoenix. After Future was Yamato, a good chapter, but also one I didn't feel as strongly about as others. Like Dawn, Yamato was a story in the far past that centered around revenge and forgiveness, the fear and inevitability of death, as well as what it meant to live and what it meant to die. I think the juxtaposition of Oguna trying to find his reason for living, and his father's vain desire to sacrifice the lives of countless innocent civilians to exist beyond death, makes for a very interesting pairing. The king in this chapter effectively only lived for the purposes of preparing his tomb, and while I think the romance was cheesy even for the standards already set by the series, I absolutely adored the ending. The notion of singing in the face of death was quite beautiful, and I really liked the contrast between the king's regretful demise as well as Oguna and Kajika meeting their respective ends without any regrets. All in all, Yamato was a beautiful chapter, albeit a little cheesy. After Yamato was Universe, which I thought was interesting. This particular part of Phoenix is infamous for its paneling and the way it uses that contrast between white and black, and I concur, it is genuinely impressive from an artistic and atmospheric standpoint. If I had one complaint about this part of the manga though, it was that it felt as though the characterization was a little bit too absurd for my liking. Again, the absurdity is part of the point, but it also made it not a very enjoyable reading experience for me. Following Universe was Karma, one of the most highly regarded chapters from the entire series, and the first to ever be adapted into anime form. For me, Karma was hands down one of the most thought-provoking chapters from the entire series, and one that best showcased Tezuka's philosophy on life, death, and reincarnation. This chapter to me is the heart and soul of Phoenix, centered around redemption, and, as the chapter title would imply, karmic retribution. For a series that constantly poses these questions of what it means to be human, what it means to live, and what it means to exist, the concept of reincarnation adds a very interesting layer of exploration to all these ideas, and I love the way this is also done through dual protagonists, Gao and Akanemaru. Both are ultimately sculptors with disabilities. They undergo incredible suffering, and yet they both have very different conclusions to their respective arcs. And along the way, the series poses these philosophical questions about why people live if only to suffer, and why people live if only for them to die. Gao's character arc follows him go from this deeply jealous and vengeful serial murderer to someone who lives for the sake of helping others live. Someone who sees the world not as a place of suffering, but as something inherently beautiful. And the way this transformation happened was through art, through sculpting. Karma was ultimately nothing short of impeccable. Easily one of the strongest chapters in my mind, and one I didn't have a lot of complaints about. I think some might take issue with the way it frames religion, but for something so grounded in Buddhist mythos and spirituality, I think Karma is more a criticism of the use of religion as a political tool than the ideas and beliefs of religions. In any case, after Karma was yet another one of my favorite chapters, Resurrection, a chapter that inspired a number of other stories I've consumed, like Robotics Notes from Saidi V, Gen Urobuchi's Sayano Uta, and Naoki Urasawa's Pluto. Resurrection perhaps has my favorite exploration of the meaning of humanity out of the entirety of Phoenix. I've talked about this in an earlier video of mine, that being my Gesicht character analysis, but in a lot of ways, this chapter maintains a great deal of thematic continuity with Osamu Tezuka's Astro Boy vis-a-vis its exploration of the validity and legitimacy of artificial existences specifically. After all, in a world where the boundaries of organic and artificial blur, what does it mean to be human? Robita in this arc constantly questions its existence as an artificial being, believing itself to be human, to the point of killing someone in order to prove its own humanity to itself. Honestly, I adored this chapter's dual path structure. On one hand, it focused on Leon, who, after becoming part artificial, falls in love with Chihiro the robot, thereby wanting to become a robot himself. And on the other hand, it also focused on Robita, a robot believing itself to be human. In a lot of ways, it feels like the structure of this chapter is exactly like that of Phoenix at large, with a story in the past and a story in the future converging with one another, with Leon and Chihiro merging to become Robita. So to that end, I think this chapter alone might be worth its own video at some point, because it explores so many interesting ideas. But yeah, there wasn't too much I didn't like about Resurrection. Now, right after Resurrection was what I found to be the most disturbing of Phoenix's chapters, Nostalgia. Honestly, I think this might be one of my least favorite chapters of Phoenix because of its content and subject matter. But nonetheless, there's certain elements to the chapter that I really liked. For as insanely messed up as it is, it's definitely gripping. I loved the way it connected back with earlier chapters of the series, like Universe. This chapter brings forth another very different exploration of what it means to live, because this time around, both the Moopies and humans alike bring forth the idea of living for the sole purpose of reproducing. Likewise, it also explores what it means to be human, with one character arguing that vices are part and parcel of someone's humanity. After Nostalgia is Civil War, one of the longest and yet also one of the least memorable of Phoenix's arcs in my eyes. I like the way this chapter explores its anti-war themes and the way it showcases the vanity of humanity's pursuit to conquer their inevitable mortality and the utter disregard that people can have for the sacredness of life in warfare. But overall, I'm not sure this chapter really did anything the other chapters didn't. I did like the main duo of Benta and Obutho. After the Civil War, in the volume release, was Robe of Feathers, a very short but powerful anti-war chapter under the backdrop of time travel. In the grand scheme of things, I don't have any strong feelings about this chapter. It's conceptually fascinating, and I appreciate it for what it is thematically, but I didn't find it to be the most engaging of Phoenix's chapters because of its short length. Nonetheless, it's great storytelling in a very brief span of time. Beyond Robe of Feathers were the final 3 chapters of Phoenix, all of which were among my favorites. Starting off with Life, which follows how a TV producer proposes cloning someone and using them for a death game-like reality TV show, only for karma to strike and him become cloned himself. Like Resurrection, this arc is about how just because something is scientifically possible doesn't mean it should be done from an ethical standpoint. But above that, the predominant message of the arc is once again that all lives are equal, all life is sacred, and all life should be treated with respect. This arc was overall just the right length, not too long, not too short. And it had a very clear-cut message, so definitely up my alley in terms of what I value out of a story. Only thing I didn't like in the chapter was the SA and incesty stuff towards the end. That felt way too absurd. But in any case, the following chapter, Strange Beings, also shared an identical message, with the protagonist locked in a time loop to make up for her sins of having killed her future self. A masterful arc all in all, some of Tezuka's strongest storytelling in my opinion. It definitely hammers home the point of the sanctity of life. Now, the last arc of Phoenix that Tezuka published before he passed away was Sun, the longest of Phoenix's arcs, but easily one of the most memorable. This arc is unique in that it simultaneously takes place in the far past and in the distant future, which makes it very poetic for it to be the last of the story's released chapters. From a storytelling, characterization, and artwork standpoint, I think this stands firmly at the top of Tezuka's work with Phoenix. It definitely made for an astoundingly memorable story. From a thematic standpoint, meanwhile, this arc still explores a lot of the recurring questions surrounding the meanings of humanity and life, but more than anything, it primarily builds off the messages established in the Karma chapter in that the politicization of religion is problematic. And I think that a lot of what it explores is compelling. But that being said, I think the way Tezuka explores religion in this chapter might rub some people the wrong way. In a sense, this chapter itself is supportive of all religions, arguing that they are all correct and that people should be free to believe in whatever they so choose. However, Tezuka in his afterword also frames religion as being inherently man-made and a byproduct of the contemporary cultures. His viewpoint shown in this arc is that over time, as older religions and current societal viewpoints come to clash, new religions will emerge and result in fighting with older religions. I'm not really sure I buy cynicism to that extent, but Tezuka was an agnostic man, and his writing in this arc is an unadulterated representation of his beliefs. I guess if there's one last thing to discuss, it's the final volume. In the English volume release of Phoenix, Volume 12 contains early works, as they put it, or otherwise earlier versions of the manga. Personally, I don't have any strong thoughts on them. It's interesting to see how his ideas evolved over time, but nonetheless, I'm glad we ended up with what we did in the Phoenix arcs that ultimately did serialize afterwards. That more or less wraps up my brief thoughts on each of the Phoenix stories, some of which I like more than others, but all of which are incredibly rich thematically and well worth reading. I just wish Tezuka was able to live long enough to finish the series off before he passed, so we would have seen what it would have been like converging at the present. We did know that the following Phoenix arc after Sun was supposed to take place in the early 20th century. It should not have been too far off from the ending point. But alas, Phoenix remains Osamu Tezuka's magnum opus, his unfinished masterpiece. It is tragically ironic that a story about mortality was cut short because of its creator's own death. Nonetheless, it is one of the most extraordinary manga I've ever had the pleasure of reading. In any case, thanks so much for sticking around, and please let me know if you'd like to see me do a deeper dive into Phoenix's individual chapters, or if you'd like to see me cover more of Osamu Tezuka's bibliography. Honestly, I think every Phoenix chapter might be worth its own video. There's a lot to say about each part of the series that I wasn't able to discuss within the confines of this video. And I definitely have a lot to say about Tezuka's other works too. Even Phoenix wasn't Tezuka's only unfinished work. Whatever it is you wish to see from me, I'll see you next time, everyone. Bossman out.